Hello, and welcome to the Raising Risk-Free Teens podcast. I'm your host, Cheryl LaBelle. In this risky world that our teens live in, we're here to equip parents with knowledge and information about the hot topics of today, sexual risk avoidance, and any other important information that we think you need to know to be informed. All of our topics will be rooted in science, facts, and medical accuracy, not opinions. Thanks for listening and hope you enjoy the podcast. Today I have Terry White with me, and she is going to give us a clearer picture about the two main types of sex education that are being taught to our children in the schools and in our culture. Now, Terry and I work for Clarity of Central Indiana, which is a nonprofit organization based out of Columbus, Indiana. However, we serve Bartholomew, Jackson, Jennings, Brown, Decatur, Shelby, Johnson, and Morgan counties. So a pretty wide, vast array of cultures and groups and areas. Now, with Clarity, just a little bit about who we are and what we do. There are three different branches of service. We do prevention, intervention, and restoration. Client services and our STI clinic, those two are intervention services. And the client services is a place where people can go to get support with pregnancy tests, infant resources, additional guidance. Our STI testing clinic, that's located in Columbus, and it provides free and reduced testing and treatment. The restoration part of Clarity is Hearts Restored, and they provide emotional and healing support for women who have experienced codependency, abortion, reproductive loss, sexual abuse, things of that nature. But today we're going to focus on the intervention part, which we do with our education department. So Terry, you're a community educator with Clarity. You're also a certified sexual risk avoidance specialist. Tell me a little bit about what you do here at Clarity.
At Clarity, I have served in a couple different roles. I started out as a volunteer and then moved into a part-time position where I was just a community educator. So I go into the schools and I teach students sexual risk avoidance program at different levels, 6th grade, 8th grade, and high school. We have 3 different levels that we currently maintain. The other part of my position is a curriculum content manager. So there's a whole bunch of information that has to go into these programs because there's a lot of different required topics, I should say, that fall under this title of sexual risk avoidance. My other side of my job involves lots and lots of research on these topics because our culture is constantly changing with these very important things that we are trying to convey to students. So we want to keep the most up-to-date message out there and try to, to be relevant to them and to anybody that we encounter when we're talking about all this. So
good. Of the two different types of information being given to our kids, one is the SRA, or the sexual risk avoidance, and that's what we do here at Clarity. Right. The other is SRR, or sexual risk reduction. Could you explain the difference between the focus and the philosophy of the SRR versus the SRA?
Yes. So basically, those are the only two philosophies that are out there. The sexual risk avoidance, or SRA, is coming from a perspective where we are trying to help students to completely 100% eliminate any sexual risk that they could encounter if they were to become sexually active. Whereas SRR stands for sexual risk reduction, and that is it's just a different ideology altogether. And that perspective basically says that students are going to have sex. They're just assumed that they're going to have sex. And so therefore, since they're going to do that, then we need to educate them and give them help in being safe when it comes to that. Sexual risk avoidance takes a different approach and says that abstinence is the 100% way to avoid any sexual risk at all. So in a class that's an SRR class, you might find a lot of emphasis on contraceptives, and some will even pass out contraceptives to students. In an SRA class, you're not going to have that. We do not promote that. Well, we will talk about contraceptives because obviously if a student decides that they're going to be sexually active, we would want them to be safe, yes, or at least try to reduce their risk. But that is not what we are going to promote. We are going to promote complete avoidance of risk, which would be abstinence until marriage. And in the state of Indiana, that is currently a state mandated standard. And so that is very helpful to us because it helps us to get into the schools easier because of the fact that, they are required to learn that.
You mentioned the program that we have called I Decide for Me, and that there are a lot of different topics that you have to research that go into that. So could you share a little bit more about what those topics are that we teach through sexual risk avoidance and the message that our I Decide for Me curriculum is delivering to our students?
Sure. We're teaching some similar topics at different grade levels, just we're age-appropriate topics. In the sixth grade, we start out with a discussion on puberty. A lot of the students are already in the middle of puberty at that age, but they don't understand necessarily what they're going through. And some of them haven't started puberty, so it's still a good topic to cover with that age group. We are also defining what sex is and what sex is not, and that's going to be approached gently and differently at each different grade level, so that we define that from the beginning because we want to make sure that all the students are on the same page with us, as because there's a lot of different ideas about what's involved with sex and what's not involved with sex. So we're defining things like that. We're also defining sexual abstinence and promoting the idea that sexual abstinence until marriage is the healthiest choice for them. So in sixth grade, we're really honing in on choices, healthy choices versus unhealthy choices. When we get to eighth grade, our focus expands on what they have learned in sixth grade and really hones in on boundaries. So we are covering boundaries from a holistic perspective, and we're covering basically trying to teach them how to establish boundaries for themselves in every area of their whole person. And that's something that's reviewed with them because we've actually talked about that in sixth grade as well. And this holistic health model that basically just illustrates that we're not just physical when it comes to our health. We obviously that is part of it, but there's more to it. There's an emotional side, a mental side, a ethical or spiritual side, and a social side. So we introduce that in sixth grade, expand on it in eighth grade, really focus on the boundary part in eighth grade. And then in high school, we're reiterating everything that we've talked about so far with them if they've been through the whole program, really honing in on this idea of sexual abstinence, just reiterating that. Also, we touch on things like sexual abuse. We talk about refusal skills and how to be confident in their ability to get out of a situation, or at least to be able to communicate that they're not comfortable with a situation in a confident manner. We talk about pornography extensively at each level and some of the different things that are involved with that, whether it's sexting, sending nudes. We have started addressing sex trafficking, not with younger children, but with the older students, because there's a link between the pornography industry and the sex trafficking industry, which many adults are not aware of. We talk about critical health behaviors. So we spend a lot of time, and this is part of my job, is spend a lot of time researching to make sure that everything that we talk about in these programs can be backed up with evidence, because we don't want the kids to think that we're just coming in there giving our opinion about what we're talking about, because that's not what we're doing. We're using researched facts, medically accurate data, and then we do throw in some real life experiences, because all of our presenters come from different backgrounds and can bring different situations to their presentation that will really help for the students' understanding. But we spend a lot of time with that research to make sure that everything can be backed up so that it's factual, because we don't want to give anybody wrong information. Mm-hmm. And we also are trying to validate what we're talking about, because we don't know the students when we walk into that classroom. We don't know their backgrounds. We don't know where they're coming from. So we're trying to address every single student, even though we don't know them. So we could have a very young innocent child in a 6th grade class, or even an 8th grade class, or even in a high school class than some of those settings. Some of them are exposed to social media, which is another thing we address. Some of them are not. It's rare these days that they're not exposed to, but every once in a while you will have a student that has not been exposed to that, and so we focus on that as well. And the whole big picture of it ties in to the fact that that student in that seat in that classroom has value, and that they are important and they matter. And we don't want any single student to feel isolated or alienated because they might be questioning their gender or their sexual orientation, or if there's a student in there who's been sexually abused, or if there's someone in there who has already participated in sexual activity. We don't want any shame to be felt by the students. And so we take a lot of time to be meticulous in trying to word ourselves properly so that no one will be harmed in any way, shape, or form. However, we want the students to know that we're for them. We're trying to empower them and teach them that they have value, and teach them that they're important and they matter. So we cover that from the beginning. I probably should have started with that. We cover with value. We talk about this holistic health model that I've discussed. We talk about boundaries. And then throughout every level of the program, we emphasize that there's hope. Because once again, we don't know where they're coming from. And they're coming from all different backgrounds, and we're not able to read their minds. We try to get them to talk to us. We try to get them to engage in our social media sites and give us some feedback. We give them a survey, and we try to get some feedback from them in that way. And every once in a while, we'll get a student that will be open with us about that. And then every once in a while, we also have a student that will talk to us afterwards, after class is over, and tell us, yes, I've experienced this, or I have, had that happen to me, or and I appreciated this class. Or you have the flip side of that. I had a student just a few weeks ago that was not happy that I was in that class. She did not want to hear what I was going to tell her. But by the end of the week, when we were with her, I think she had softened a little bit. And hopefully that means she learned something. So anyway, we cover a whole bunch of things in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I appreciate the parts of our curriculum that talk about having that go-to adult to talk to, someone that they trust and can that knows them and can help recognize healthy behaviors or unhealthy, or if they need advice. And like the red flags and the green flags of relationships, I think I hear the kids say a lot of times how valuable that is for them when they're in the classroom, and they hear that too. And all of it just ties into that intrinsic value that they have, and that they find in other people too. I feel like when we go into the classrooms, like you said, we don't really know what background they're coming from. And we just kind of drop in for a week to give them so much information. I feel like they're each holding their own deck of cards, and they're playing their hand, and we're just trying to teach them how to play the game in a way that's healthy to avoid risk. Because everyone is so different, but we want them to make good, healthy choices. So we're trying to empower them and give them those tools and fight against a lot of competing voices. Sometimes at home, sometimes among their peer groups, sometimes just the social media and what they hear and see. So music, everything. Good.
Something else we cover, which I didn't mention, but you kind of touched on it, is we talk about this holistic health model, and that we're not just physical, but we do touch on the physical side of it too. And because we don't want them leaving there thinking that it's okay to be participating in sexual activity. We want them to refrain from that. So we do go into the consequences that can happen if they were to make that choice. And, things like pregnancy and STDs, and we try to give them the facts on that, do some activities with them to show just how challenging it would be to have a child, when you're a teenager, or give them some facts about STDs and how difficult it might be to live with some of those, especially if it was one that they didn't have a cure that they could acquire, and have to deal with the rest of their life. So
because language is very tricky. They've gone from calling it a sexually transmitted infection, used to be a disease, because diseases imply that there's no cure, which some of them don't actually have cures. So calling it an STI sometimes can be misleading for our young people. as we go into the classrooms and we share this message, we talk with them about that. Have you seen over the history of us teaching this SRA message how that emphasis affects a behavioral goal, an outcome in the students? Are they behaviorally changing what they're doing, how they think, their intentions towards sexual activity?
Yes, I think that we're seeing that to an extent, because we know that the teen pregnancy rate has gone down, and it has been going down historically since the late 1990s. It used to be, an outrageous number, and now it's much, much lower than it was at that time. And it has been consistent in that it's been going down. But having said that, we are still seeing lots of STDs with our teens. So, in fact, those have escalated. And so we know that this whole idea, and I'll just say, of sexual activity and sexual behavior is they're not completely avoiding it. So
it seems like when we go into the classroom and we define sex, it's intercourse. And a lot of the kids think that's what it is. But when we start to explain that message a little bit more, that it is activity, any kind of sexual activity, and we will spare our listeners of all the details, but just that skin on skin contact is where I think a lot of those STDs and STIs are passing between. And kids think that, young people think that they're not doing anything wrong. They're still virgins, but they're still participating in activities that affect their whole person. So, and they just don't always realize that. So you said that we are seeing a decrease in teen pregnancy.
I think we're also seeing a decrease in sexual debut as to how early that sexual activity is initiated compared to the way it was in the past.
Yeah, and I believe with SRA, it really is trying to delay that sexual debut, because the longer an individual waits, the less likely they are to get an STD or pass it along, or to get pregnant, those kinds of things. Even with their whole person, I hear around the office a lot of talk about brain development. These students that we go and talk to, part of the teenage years is self-actualization and realizing who you are, and self-efficacy. We talk about that too, confidence. And my experience, even with my own children, is that teenagers tend to talk in absolutes. This is who I am. And 10 minutes later, this is who I am. Well, you just contradicted yourself. But likewise, when it comes to making decisions, we want them to be empowered to make good, healthy choices, because their brains aren't even fully developed. And so to make some of those choices, they're still learning. And we want them in that trial and error phase to still be safe in what they're doing, and avoid that risk, because some of those STIs, they will affect kids for the rest of their lives without even realizing they've put themselves in danger.
Another thing that we really focus on is marriage, and not, we don't want them to think, well, after your brain's developed, it's fine. You can just be as sexually active as you want. But we really want to promote marriage. And so we talk about this thing called the success sequence, which is, I always have to be very careful how I say that. But we teach that to the students because there's been a lot of research that shows that students who follow this formula or this success sequence, which basically says if you get your education, and then you get full-time employment, and then you get married, and then you have children, and you do it in that order rather than in mixing it up, that you're going to reduce your chance of being in poverty. And so what the research, if I remember correctly, what the research says is that, there's a lot of people that have been able to move themselves out of a lower class and up to the middle class. And so talking about students being very black and white, that's something that's it's kind of enticing to them a little bit, because, when you ask them about their goals, because there's components of the programming where we're asking them about what their future goals and trying to get them to think ahead, even though their brains aren't fully developed, to think about, okay, where would you like to be? And what would you like to be doing in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, when your brain is fully developed? And so just trying to get them to think outside of their current circumstance, and in the context of that success sequence, and that they can be empowered to be very, very productive in their life. And, what I was going to say a while ago is that one of the goals that I often hear is, I want to make a lot of money. Well, Okay, you want to make a lot of money, you might want to think about whether you're participating in sex now or later.
So the SRA program really it's a wonderful, valuable educational program that we offer. And while we're coming into the schools and teaching this to the students, we're really partnering with our community, with our teachers, with the adults that are in these students' lives, trying to help boost and bolster their community and their culture that they live in to make healthier choices and to think differently. What always is so interesting and so unfortunate that one of the first things we do on day one is to ask how many teens your age do you think are having sex? And so many of the kids say ridiculous statistics, such high statistics.
Yeah.
And then we tell them the actual current statistics that the CDC has released, and it's significantly less.
Right.
And you just see the looks on the kids' faces when, well, what does this tell you? That not everyone's having sex. But advertisement, culture, everything is implying and assuming
Right.
that, I mean, especially like that SRR message,
Yeah.
that, well, we just assume you're going to have sex.
It shows how much the media is really controlling our young people and our older people. It's not just the young students, because we go through and after we talk about those numbers, we walk them through different aspects of media to get them to really realize, oh wow, sex is everywhere, and it is. But that's not the way it's always been. And that's another thing that we bring up to them is that we have a quote that we use that was written many, many years ago, and talks about how sex is not to be whispered about in quiet, dark corners and everything. It should be, it's natural as the appetite for food. And so we explain that to them. So these feelings you're having, these are natural things that your body is going to do, but we need to be able to talk about it. We need to not make everything hush hush, because like generations ago, like for instance, myself, no one talked about that at all. When I was growing up, I got a 5-minute video in high school, and it was about how babies were made, reproduction, and when I was in high school. So, yeah. And so we've had a huge culture shift. Like, so in that generation, nobody talked about it. Now everybody talks about it, except for the people that need to be talking about it.
Yes.
So
Correct. Yeah.
So we just kind of make the kids think about that critically. Like, oh yeah, of course you're hearing it in your music and your movies and your video games, and even books you read. Whereas we didn't have that. That was actually that was a taboo topic years ago. So,
and not all of that information is true or
Right.
factual
Right.
or even realistic with that whole person circle.
Exactly.
Even in the healthiest of marriages, it doesn't, sex does not always look the way that
right.
people assume or think that it would or should
Right.
look like. So, yeah, it definitely, it is a cultural change that we're trying to, a shift that we're trying to help our students make so that
Right.
they can set good, healthy boundaries and make good choices
Right.
for themselves too. Wonderful. All of this is great information. I really hope that anyone who's listening will be interested in finding out more information about what it is that we do. If you're interested in learning more about Clarity, our website is www.claritycares.org. You can, through that website, get to our I Decide for Me website. But if you want to go directly to that, it's www.idecideforme.com. And we have all of our programs listed there. If you're listening and you're interested in bringing this program to your school, please feel free to reach out to us or talk to your children's teachers, their health teachers. Usually that's like the gym health track that at least the high schools take. School nurse or a guidance counselor. Those are ways that we can get into the schools to share this important message. And we are full transparency. Our materials are on there. We want to partner with schools and the community. And I know you don't hear a lot about SRA in our culture. You hear more about the SRR message. It's a lot louder than the message that we have. But really, all of the statistics, all of the data, even the CDC backs the SRA message as being one that is healthier for our students, our young people, our communities, our neighborhoods, everything. Is there anything else that you want to share about SRA or Clarity or what we're doing?
Well, I just think when I joined Clarity and I learned about the education program, that was my background prior to being here. And so I knew that if I was going to work at Clarity, that's where I wanted to be. And I know that I was in shock when I learned just how many schools we were in this area. So I know that there are, I have colleagues in other states that some of them that are actually using the I Decide for Me program, some that are using other programs, but there's not a ton of SRA programs out there. But the message, I'm hopeful and think that it will grow as we continue to press on, because it's obvious in Indiana that it has been a welcomed message and a needed message among students. So anyway, I've been excited about being able to be in the classroom and be an influence on young people. So
Well, thank you for all your hard work and commitment to the SRA message and purpose and goals too for Clarity and here and in other states as others are using our curriculum. So, well, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Clarity of Central Indiana. If you enjoyed today's chat, please leave us a review or share with a friend. Always remember, you have value, you have worth, you matter.